My people, wonderful Bears fans, welcome. Welcome to Euphoria. What a wonderful and wild ending to the season. How about that? Are you kidding me? I mean, talk about an amazing, incredible to watch ending to this game. I mean, truly something out of, I don't want to say legend, but I'm going to use the word legend for crying out loud. So, we've got a heck of a game to recap here. Heck of a game. But unfortunately, we're not talking about Bears Vikings. I don't know. What a weird dynamic today was. Did everybody in here watch both games? Did you watch the Bears game? At what point did you stop watching the Bears game if you did watch the Bears game? Because I can tell you, I was watching both truly up until about halfway through the third quarter when the Vikings went, oh gosh, I'd have to look it back up, but it was like 23-6, at which point I think it was Peterman or was it Boyle? Honestly, I got the two confused just because I was so tied up with what was going on with Texans and Colts that they drove down, they scored, and everything was quiet from there. I mean, it was a weird, weird day. And I mean, to be honest with you, as a Bears fan, can you ask for a more electric football game than what we got from from the Chiefs and from the Texans and the Colts? I mean, truly, like, you want to talk about crazy, you want to talk about dramatic. It felt like the Colts understood exactly what they were doing. I don't want to say lost on purpose, but all the way down to going for it on fourth down on the goal line, down 10 and missing. Felt like the Colts were trying to work their way out of a win. And then suddenly, 17 points later, the Colts were winning. Emphatically, no less. They not only took a 4-point lead, they then compounded it with another 3 points, and the Texans had to make a drive to win the game. And not only did the Texans do it, but they did it they did it with a 4th and 10 conversion to Cooks, with a 4th and 20 conversion to Atkins, with a 2-point conversion to Atkins, and then some absolutely classic Lovie Smith defense to take this thing home. I mean, friends and fans, what a day. What a day. What a season. Let's call it what it is. Borderline miraculous for Chicago. Can you think of, don't think of the specifics, right? Don't get tied up in the specifics. If I had told you that you could have entered this 2022 season and you would have A, found out Justin Fields was the dude, and B, gotten the number 1 overall draft pick, would you have said, that's ridiculous, that can't possibly happen? It just did. Exactly, Ron. I agree with you. Justin Fields fell to the Bears. Justin Fields established himself. Justin Fields showed the city whose hands that he's in. And then the Chicago Bears locked in a pick that they should be able to get quite a market for. I mean, look, I got to be blunt with you guys. I don't know who follows my Twitter. If you don't, you should. If you do, let's talk about it. So around the start of the game, I started making fun of the Texans for blowing this. And then the Texans started to give the lead back. So I went full the other direction. Somebody pointed out that I was jinxing the team. So I went full disappointment. I went full, it's over. It's totally over. They gave this back. Takes 2 to tango. Attempting to see if I couldn't steer it the other way. But also, I'll be honest, I was crushed at the moment. You want to talk about young emotion? Yeah, I was definitely wallowing in it. And then the Texans roar back and bring things to where they are. But one thing I talked about on the on my Twitter that I wanted to bring up in this before we start the podcast, and it's just me today. So at some point, I'll probably see if any of you guys want to come onto the show. We can do a podcast during the off season. I know I'm notoriously bad about not doing off season podcasts, but so that aside, one thing I can't help but notice. So in the crucible of the moment, when the Bears finally had lost the game and it was a matter of, are they going to get number 1 or are they going to get number 2? It really clicked with me that the number 1 overall pick is a guaranteed trade commodity. I mean, regardless of whether the NFL community loves Will Levis, whether they love Bryce Young, or whether they love CJ Stroud, somebody wants their pick of the litter. Somebody does. I don't know who it is yet. Maybe it's the Texans. Maybe it's the Colts. Maybe it's the Panthers. Who knows who it is? But things get dramatically more murky the moment that first overall picks a quarterback, because the moment that the second overall pick is up to bat is the same moment that a whole bunch of teams QB1 just fell off the board, and the team after the Bears is likely Seattle, who may or may not be picking a quarterback, and the team after them is likely, well, at the time with Indianapolis winning, it was going to be Arizona, and Arizona doesn't need a quarterback. Like, it's not to say that there was no market for number 2 overall, but you got to remember, Tua Tagovailoa, who had a ton of hype surrounding him, and Justin Herbert, who had plenty of hype surrounding him, those guys fell to number 5 and number 6 in their respective drafts. It is impossible to overstate just how big a win the Texans win was for the Chicago Bears, because chances are that makes not only trade down options very real, but it basically gives them full control over what this offseason is going to look like. Because as much as plenty of people are going to say, hey, nobody in this class is Caleb Williams, there wasn't a Caleb Williams in last draft either. It's been quite some time since the 2020 offseason. And whether you're the Jets, I know the Jets, but whether you're the Panthers, whether you're or whether you're Seattle, whether whoever you are, Texans, pick your team that you think doesn't have a quarterback, right? Whatever these teams are, I can't wait around forever. Maybe even the Falcons. Are they really that committed to Ritter, right? If they are not, this is a great year to get a quarterback so that you can start that development cycle, and ideally within the scope of your coaching contract, it still deliver the quarterback results. Like Ron 13 here says, Ron, I'm going to highlight your comment. 2 years without a good quarterback in the draft is a long time in the NFL. So when people take a look at Bryce Young, when people take a look at CJ Stroud, when people take a look at Will Levis, you got to remember that they're not just being viewed through the lens of, well, they're not Caleb Williams. They're also being viewed through the lens of, this is a way better class than last year's class. And I think that bodes well for the team with number 1. So we'll have to see what happens here. And Damo, I agree with you that I get what you're saying. The bright side is that if the Bears do pick at number 1, I mean, look, sitting here at this moment, I can't imagine that I would just agree with it. But at the same time, Will Anderson and Jalen Carter's film in particular, I've really come around to Anderson in particular. I think Tyree Wilson's really rad. I think Jalen Carter's got tons of juice in him. I think that everybody's got some question marks. Who doesn't have some question marks? But I also think that Will Anderson looks like very, 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 very good, and would be somebody who would be exciting, to certainly have on the Bears. I struggle to be like Ron kind of just mentioned, Damo. I will struggle to be upset that the Bears added an A1 caliber player, regardless of who it is. But trade down dreams get a lot less. I don't want to use the word fake. Okay, so let me use an example. Last year, a lot of people, like myself, really wanted the Bears to trade down from either 39 or 40. Those weren't the picks, were they? We wanted them to trade it at least once in the second round. Trading down made a lot of sense. The problem is that when you're running through a mock draft simulator, the simulator will give you almost 100% of the time a trade down option. At least one. Some team wants to come up to take somebody. In the real world, that may not be true. I mean, it takes very specific players to get teams to give up draft capital. I mean, truly, in my opinion, it's easier to tell ourselves that we're going to trade down especially when you're talking about a second round pick, than it is to orchestrate that trade down. That's not to go to bat for polls immediately. It's more to say that it is easy for us fans to suggest that we know something, versus it's easier for us to suggest that we know something than it is for Ryan Poles to do it. Does that make sense? I'm trying to communicate a like a thought, and I hope it's coming through. Basically, there's sometimes when people like me would say, let's trade down, and there were no partners. It takes two to tango. But with the Bears having number one overall, kind of like Berlissimo said, I would argue that I think this Bears team needs a top 10 pick and as many other picks as possible in the top 50, much more than they need a specific number one pick. I also personally think that if you're not taking a quarterback, as much as I like Anderson and as much as I like Carter, I do think that the top players at this draft, I don't really feel like there's a Myles Garrett. As good as Will Anderson is, and maybe I need to go watch Myles Garrett's college film again, like to me it's not as easy as there's a bona fide defensive ultra star. But then again, Chris Jones and Aaron Donald were I can't remember when Chris Jones was drafted, but Aaron Donald was drafted at number 9, so it's never as easy as, oh yeah, we had him circled from the draft, or like from the moment of the draft, and he'll fit in just about anywhere. I'll tell you, Berlissimo, I do think the same way, where I feel like Carter is rawer than a lot of people want to act like he is. I think he shows the most explosive potential out of the defenders in this draft. But frankly, I would tell you that in my opinion, the like a lot, there are a good cluster of, thank you, the Aaron Donald pick 13. Frankly, that even strengthens the argument, Drex and Two Stop. Like, to me, there is a cluster of players in the top 8 or so defenders that are all very, very, very good. I mean, Jordan, you mentioned Tyree Wilson, in your opinion, was the like is 85% of Will Anderson. I would tell you that Tyree Wilson in this specific case might be, I mean, he's just a dramatically better scheme fit because he's about 25 pounds heavier. And I'm not saying he's a better or worse pass rusher. I really don't want to get into that immediately on this podcast, but it's more to say that if you told me that Matt Eberflus saw Tyree Wilson as more valuable than Will Anderson, I wouldn't tell you that was ridiculous. I would tell you his schemes being a smidgen rigid, but that's what happens sometimes. I mean, it depends. The point is that number one overall helps the Bears wiggle out of the pick and basically pick where they want to pick from. Because if they want to go all the way down to number 9 with Las Vegas, I'm pitching some silly ideas, to be clear. I'm not saying any of these are even realistic. But if they wanted to go down only to number 4, number 5, and deal with Indianapolis, they can. If they wanted to go all the way down to number 9 or wherever Vegas finishes and pick up like a Devontae Adams or a slew of other picks as they went, sure, I guess that's an option. Like, the Bears can pick and choose their spot because now they've got a bunch of teams that understand the market is open. The auction has begun. The Bears are in the unusual situation of holding on to a number 1 pick that I don't think anybody thinks that they like want. For lack of a better word. And thank you, Berlissimo. Even more interesting that Chris Jones wasn't even a first rounder. It shows you the impact that some of these second round guys can make, regardless of who they are. So the Bears end up right now, the auctioneer, running an auction on the first overall pick, which rules. I'm very, very excited to see the way things run from here. I'm very, very excited that as Bears fans, we finally get to act like the protagonists that we deserve to be. I mean, you want to talk about like the fan advantage here? You don't have to use the words "if the Texans pick blank then" one time, not even a single time. Like, it is all about what do the Bears do. The Bears start the action here. Just like a pitcher in baseball, the game doesn't start until we move, which is awfully fun as both content creators, as fans, as everybody relating to the organization now, because they're on the front foot with free agency. They're on the front foot with the draft. And they get to go from here. And I mean, Carlos and Haplo, just to address the elephant in the room, you mentioned what would happen if the Bears drafted Bryce Young and traded Fields. What would happen if they did like a draft quarterback thing? Okay, so there's one. Look, to me, it is a conundrum that I am seeing in the NFL right now. And maybe you guys are seeing something else, but I just don't. I think we need to address an elephant in the room a little bit. And that is that there are a whole lot of people that think that somehow if you traded Justin Fields, that he would get back his value. I just don't think so. I mean, if the Bears, let's say they tried to trade Justin Fields at this exact moment, I would tell you with a straight face that I think that anybody who's going to trade for Justin Fields is going to wonder why he's on the block at all. If the Bears, let's say, drafted Bryce Young entirely because they wanted to stick with Fields, but they wanted to auction Bryce Young off and they didn't feel like they had enough takers, I think any team in the NFL that was smart would hold the Bears' feet to the fire. Don't offer them anything more than a discount for Bryce Young, like 80% of his value in that case, because they are holding on to two quarterbacks, and that's just useless to them. That's not what the Bears want. Right. And so, in my opinion, I think a lot of these are like taking numbers too seriously. If it was as easy as swapping poker chips, right? Where you could draft a Bryce Young, you could compare the two, you could take a look at their letter grades, and then you could just push a quarterback to the open market and then immediately change things around, then yeah, of course it's an option. And like you said, Reinhardt, it's a possibility if they ultimately go into the film room and see a top five quarterback in Young, Stroud, or Levis. It's possible. The film work that I have done on those groups, to me, look, I don't want to make any wild statements here on what is it, January the 8th. Like it's awfully early in this in this draft process. But I would tell you, Reinhardt, that in my opinion, I don't think any of these guys, not like any like Stroud shows you some tools. Young is awfully small, but the arm is there. The accuracy's there. He does crazy stuff in the pocket practically for fun. Young is much more of a gunslinger than I think a lot of people want to make him. And then Levis is your prototype pocket quarterback, so to speak. And I think that gets a lot of people really, really rolling. The question becomes, right? Do I actually think that any of these guys are going to be the next Josh Allen? Right. And the jury's obviously like, I don't want to say jury's out, but it's like my opinion is not law. Like, obviously, we'll take a look at more film. We'll take a look at more all kinds of things, like more film, more data. We'll get Senior Bowl practices from not any of those guys. I don't know why I said that, but we'll get the combine. We'll get off-season workouts. We'll get pro days. We'll get mock. But the more that I know I look at these quarterbacks, the more that I think that a ton of what the Bears have in Justin Fields is easier to work off of than using number one. Because while you need to go best player available, you absolutely do, Reinhardt. The moment that you grab a quarterback, you restart his timer too. I would make a strong argument to you, just not you specifically, Reinhardt. You have to look at all your options. It would be borderline GM criminal to not look at all of your options. If you think Bryce Young is the guy and you've got to figure out what you're going to do with Justin Fields, then that's that. But I think it's much more likely that if the Bears were going to move on from Justin Fields, they would do so in 2024. Now, it's not as easy as point and click at Caleb Williams, right? I mean, the team that drafts number one in 2024 is very likely to take Caleb Williams. Why on earth would they trade out of it? But in my opinion, like exactly, Reinhardt, that you take the picks that you have, you sign the free agents that you have, you build a roster core so that Fields either shows you improvement or you pick probably Quinn Ewers or something like that. I mean, now I haven't done really a lick of film study on Ewers in particular. I've seen a little bit of Caleb Williams, but it was a ratty game against Oregon State. But to what you're saying, Reinhardt, I think that if you took quarterback right now, I don't know if you'd get the answers. To use a silly example, I don't think Bryce Young survives the season that Justin Fields just had. Would he take all of the same sacks? I mean, I'm not going to immediately point and say yes, but he's going to take some, and the guy might not be 200 pounds. And as much as people want to make that something that doesn't matter, it does. I mean, you got to remember the only reason that your boy here thinks that Kyler Murray works in the NFL is because I make the argument he's untouchable. And then most of the time when you watch an Arizona game, like Kyler Murray just doesn't really get hit. He's so fast. He's so fast in a straight line and going sideways that he just doesn't get hit. And that's part of why at his weight, he's able to hang in the NFL. Bryce Young isn't that fast, not that fast, right? And because of that, I think that eventually he's a prime candidate to I mean, I don't want to be morbid, right? But it wouldn't surprise me if like Young is a candidate to get his shoulder collapsed on, just like Travis Gibson did with Jalen Hurts, and then suddenly, even if Young is the dude that or that you end up with a quarterback that's just not playing, and if he can't survive in the NFL, then that sucks. Now, Drex, you mentioned he may not be so fast anymore. That's your fear for Justin Fields. I'll tell you that in my opinion, the hope, Drex, is that Justin Fields doesn't have to be a superstar runner. Like, and I agree with you, Barrelissimo, that like Murray doesn't process like Young does. Young seems like he puts in a lot of the work off the field that I don't think Murray wants to. I don't think it's as simple as processor. I would tell you that to me, with Murray, I hate to beat a dead horse, but I tend to think it comes out of work ethic. But while he's not far off in the mobility, I mean, Barrelissimo, we saw a perfect example of Justin Fields' like late season running versus his mid-season running. The difference between being one step faster and one step slower than where you are or were is massive in the NFL. I mean, the difference between being mid-season Justin Fields fast is running around any defensive end in football, whereas then when you're late season Justin Fields fast, suddenly you're getting caught by him sometimes. And so to me, the like with Young, my question becomes, while he's still quick, is he so fast that he can constantly protect himself, or will he get cranked here and there? But now we're just talking where honestly we're going off the deep end. Because at the end of the day, I personally think Drex, to what you're saying, if I'm a Bears fan, and I am, I don't think the goal is to turn Fields into Lamar Jackson. I think the goal would be to turn Fields into kind of like Josh Allen, but a different flavor. Like if Josh Allen is mint chocolate chip, you're trying to, I don't know, turn into peppermint swirl. This metaphor is not working for me, and I understand that. The point is that you're trying to build a passer that also runs. Right-handed Steve Young, not a bad way to put it. Exactly what he was in college, right, Kingtree? I mean, a guy who can sit back and deliver and run when he has to. And I also tend to think that Fields is going to be okay. And Drex, that's the thing. You say I wanted to say Mahomes. Mahomes is his own guy. Like Mahomes is tough to replicate because that kind of ability is just tough to find, right? You're going to be very, very, very hard. Like hard pressed to find that. I think that with Justin Fields, you get a little bit more wild playmaker. It wouldn't surprise me, honestly. Like I get what you mean when you talk about Mahomes, Herbert in the same category of strong armed. I think if I could be honest with you guys, the most positive thing I could say about Justin Fields is that I think if the Bears get Justin Fields a decent offensive line, like capital D, decent offensive line, and a little bit of upgrade at wide receiver, and who knows, maybe you add some tight end weapons, that we just don't know what we have in Justin Fields, and that the electricity, the talent, the production is just boiling over. It's bubbling over from what Justin Fields is able to do. I hate to put it in this kind of term, but I don't think Fields is setting out to rush for records. I think that because of the inefficiency of this passing offense, that's how he was going to succeed. The Justin Fields that I have seen, especially in the Buffalo game, a little bit in the Lions game, but there wasn't quite as much attempt to do it. And the Eagles game certainly is Justin Fields does want to win from the pocket, but if he can't win from the pocket, he still wants to win and will do whatever he's got to do to play within that. I think that this season was still helpful for Fields. Jordan, if you're still in here, I know you're the number one critic of Ryan Poles' offseason, but assuming that Justin Fields doesn't walk away needing surgery, which, hey, that's an if, and that would be a massive, massive problem. It really would. Like that would be a huge downside. Justin Fields may just barely have survived a season where he took more sacks on percentage than David Carr. Guys, let's call a spade a spade. What Justin Fields had to endure was abysmal this season, especially towards the late piece when you started getting injured players left and right. Mooney goes out, the defense gets worse, everything in between just gets poor because instead of a bunch of close games where you're grinding it down, you start to stare at these at blowouts where Justin Fields is having to work his way back into the game. And Cody, I will get to that. That's a great question. Because of this, let's acknowledge that the situation that Justin Fields had to survive in this year was terrible. I mean, really, really terrible. But the idea would be that he doesn't have to do it again. Now, granted, many, many people have built all hope on next season will be better than this one. And We don't know that. I mean, we we don't. The hope would be that it would be, but look at the Bengals' offensive line. Certainly, they've figured things out recently, but that doesn't mean that they didn't invest a ton into offensive line and get next to no return at the early part of next season. It's just not that easy to apply upgrades to your team, no matter who they are. Cody, you mentioned, what do I think about Michael Thomas? And Justin Fields. I'll tell you, Cody, what I am looking for with Justin Fields is I want to see a receiver added to this team that Justin Fields definitively and explicably trusts. I mean, I think that right now the Bears don't have that. I mean, I don't know who it would even be. Maybe it's Mooney to some degree, but I don't think Mooney is the super separator that I have envisioned. When I think of Michael Thomas, another thing, if I could just call a spade, Cody, I think of a guy who hasn't played meaningful football in years. I'd have to go back and look up how long it's been since every football season, to me at least, as somebody who covers the league pretty low level. A year feels like an awfully long time, and I know Thomas has been out of the game for at least 2. So I don't know. Like, to some, it's the same apple that you're chasing, Cody, with Calvin Ridley, right? Where on one hand, that's a great trade for the Jags because Calvin Ridley's a phenomenal player coming off a suspension. But on another, every time a player takes extraordinary time away from football, okay, Cody, he did play earlier this year. How did he play? If you don't mind me asking. If it's not clear, I know of the player, obviously, but I haven't broken down his film lately. So if he's still the route runner that he used to be, that's awfully great, and maybe a decent ad. But it's also worth remembering, Cody, that the Bears really only get, okay, so I'm going to say something awfully dramatic, but I do believe it's true. The Bears really only get one significant shot at adding a wide receiver one, whatever that looks like. If you sign Jacoby Myers to play in the slot as the JSN style super separator, but just not quite as core as JSN, you're not talking yourself into Alan Lazard or Jacoby Myers being that wide receiver one. But when you bring in Michael Thomas, you didn't bring in a name like that to be wide receiver 3, usually. It does seem as if Thomas gets hurt an awful lot, so I can't say for sure that he's the best bet injury-wise. But to be fair, the Bears they do not have a crazy amount of options, and I understand that. So it'll be interesting to see what chances or what choices they make. Jordan, you mentioned earlier that I want to highlight this because I think it's an important point, right? You mentioned that it's great that they have number 1, but you'll maintain that it never had to be this way, and you're correct. The question becomes, you tell me, honestly, which spot would you rather be in? Not you, Jordan, and not even to say pay or like Poles. Let's be clear here. Robert isn't about to defend Poles explicitly. Robert is about to attempt to articulate what the kind of thought process that Poles is walking through so that we can then decide for ourselves what we want, right? There are tons of ways to build a team. You can attempt to build it as quickly as you can, right? Where let's yeah, Turu, we'll get there. Like I'll talk about that in a minute. There are tons of teams that they try to do what they can to get as good as possible, as quick as possible, so that they can win some games. Let's take a look at the Giants. Let's take a look at the Titans. Let's take a look at the Jets. The Jets aren't a great example because they honestly should have been better. So let's wipe the Jets out. The Titans, the Giants. You guys could probably think of some other names. The Raiders are not a bad example of this. The Vikings are kind of in this category where they draft as well as they can, they spend as well as they can, they push their chips in as well as they can, and certainly they think they're going to make the playoffs, and maybe, just maybe, they'll also win a Super Bowl, not unlike the Rams ultimately did. But I'll tell you, Jordan, that in my opinion, if I was talking to a friend of mine, right, that was, because the Lions and the Dolphins, Barelissimo, I think are a little different, but let me get to that. The Lions actually may be in this category. You may be right about that. The problem is, Jordan, that in my opinion, if the Bears could be synonymized as a personal friend of mine, it would have been somebody with tons of credit card debt that had taken out a second mortgage to pay for a business that was struggling that ultimately they needed to get away from, right? Maybe they had the quarterback because he just traded a ton of assets to get Justin Fields. I'll speak in football terms so that I don't have to make too many metaphors, but massive credit card debts, Not a ton of future assets, not a, or like a lot of picks coming up, but next to nothing on the core roster right now. Even if the Bears had pushed their chips in, maybe they squeeze out a 2023 competition window, but I would argue that they don't have the draft and capital flexibility that they do now then. And again, would things have been easier to watch? Sure. Could they have won a lot more games? Definitely. I mean, when you're 1-7 in close games, like if you go back and you look up the record of the 0-16 Lions, you'll realize that that team was only in 5 close games all season, which is wild, right? That they only were in that many one-score games. That's very, very low. So what the Bears did was that they cleaned off all that debt. They paid their credit card, right? They wrapped everything under them. They had an entire season of just evaluating who is where and allowing players to step up. Look, is it better than pushing all your chips in? That's a you tell me thing, right? Is it better for the Titans, Jordan, that they built a team that was good enough to make the playoffs, even if that team ultimately got held back by the fact that Ryan Tannehill was not quite good enough to carry an entire passing game once they had to do things that weren't play action based and once they had to lead the offense through his arm rather than, again, those big play action pockets that the Titans had made their home, right? Was it good for is it good for the Vikings that they're as tethered as they are to Kirk Cousins, despite the fact that the defense is really not all that talented? And look, I could talk about point differential. Everybody wants to laugh at the Vikings, but they're a good example of another team in cap limbo, right? And the Bears, on the other hand, while it cost them Justin Fields' sophomore season, while it cost them probably Justin Fields' junior season in terms of competing for the Super Bowl, the question becomes, Jordan, could the approach that you're articulating only have gotten them to here, whereas Poles gives them the opportunity to reach for here, right? It's about boom and bust. Ryan Poles dug out a lot of the crap. He dumped a lot of players off the roster, some too many. Like Duke Shelley is a really solid player in the Vikings system on the outside that the Bears and Ryan Poles had, or apparently just didn't even want to try in that outside spot. And here he is playing good football on the Vikings. The Bears threw Kyrus Tonga out and he's playing good football. Is he also on the Vikings? Did the Vikings really pick up 2 former Bears? I think it's the Vikings. But so anyways, getting back to it, what Ryan Poles has given the Bears a chance to do is to add premier talent that they wouldn't have had an opportunity for, and future picks, and still get that same mid-level pick that you would have hoped that they would have gotten had they been in the Giants situation. The Giants, to use an example, Jordan, and the Lions are another example. The Lions may very well stick with Jared Goff, and that's a whole conversation for another time, but let's just call a spade, right? Does it ultimately gimp the Giants that they have won so many games that getting up for a quarterback will cost them an awful lot, right? That, to me, that's a big question. Let's see, Derek, you mentioned do we want to talk about missed opportunities? The big one isn't trying to keep rolling this season. It's blowing things up a year earlier. Derek, do you mean the fact that they allowed Pace and Nagy, et cetera, to that they allowed Pace and Nagy to run the 2021 team and pay or put all that money on the credit card? Because I agree with you. It's more to say at this point, like you're saying, Jordan, there's validity to both sides. There's no one way. And I will tell you, Jordan, that if Ryan Poles had done all this and the Bears had ended up with number 7, it doesn't work, right? I'm sitting here. Okay, we've all seen these kinds of games, right? There are people like me that are very pro offense, pro big data, pro saying you got to build your offense and then you can win games, right? And then you look at a game where a defense like Jacksonville's game wins the game for them and you say, see, defense still wins championships, right? And it's results in football can color the results in football can color the lines of argument in awfully strange ways when the Rams set aside all common draft logic, trade for functionally everybody, don't use any of their draft picks that everybody else is trying to hoard, and then win a Super Bowl. And now, sure, the core is rotten, so to speak. Like they had a terrible, terrible season, and they don't even get to reap the benefits from it. But when you win a Super Bowl, don't you get like a little halo where everything you did was right for a little while? So, Barelissimo, you mentioned the Lions' arrow is up. They likely project that getting up for a quarterback next year, if Goff is more than this year when they could take less pain to protect the future. Probably. Like, rarely do stat heads use the ones that do not support their argument. 100%. Like, don't hear me, Barelissimo, as being anti-Goff. Goff has stepped up. Like, Goff and Geno Smith are great examples of how a lot of people will throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to a talented quarterback and not acknowledge system around them when they don't want to. McVay is perfect. It couldn't possibly have anything to do with what Sean McVay is doing, because Jared Goff sucks. Goes to the Lions, system around him. He's always been a phenomenal football thrower. Like, there are pieces to quarterback, right? Like, there's processor, there's pocket management, there's athleticism, there's football throwing. Jared Goff has been throwing darts since the day he started his second NFL season. I'm not going to commit to his first, but the guy threw for 4,800 yards at one point. Like, to suggest that he's a bust or totally sucks isn't fair. It's why I don't think he's a great core piece of this argument. But let me see, John, what did you say? You mentioned, yeah, exactly, Drex. You mentioned the problem with people arguing about certain cases showing their point. Many times people are looking or pointing to outliers rather than looking at all the data. Yeah, there's truth to all of this. I mean, there's truth to all kinds of these arguments. What I am attempting to say overall is that Ryan Poles cut a tank season out for the Bears. They now enter this offseason pretty much in control of the whole thing. And why does it work in this case? It works because they didn't get number 3. They didn't get number 6. They didn't get number 5. They got number 1. And because they got number 1, they functionally hold all of the leverage. It takes a lot of luck to win in the NFL. It does. To pretend it doesn't is unfair. I mean, think about the fact that the Rams won a Super Bowl partially because the Bucks fumbled it, was it 4 times in their playoff game? And Brady still, at the very end of the game, almost brought it back. If the Bucks win that game, the Rams don't win the Super Bowl, and nothing that they did is worth it, right? But the Rams stayed remarkably healthy. They cashed in on the opportunities that they had. They squeezed by the Buccaneers and got to face a Bengals team that, after the Chiefs after the AFC had basically just all beaten each other, the Bengals squeezed their way through on a dramatic end of season, or like a dramatic second half. Awesome. Like, as a football fan, and suddenly you've got 2 teams lovingly that probably weren't the best teams in their conference, but they're the ones who lasted to the end. And then the Rams won, and more power to them. Like, it's not that simple, right? Like, it's not as simple as saying the best team always wins or the best roster always wins. It can take one injury that'll completely throw a whole season in the tank, depending on where it is. Will Jalen Hurts come back and play like we hope he would? I sure hope so, but we don't know, right? It's not that easy. It's more to say that, in my opinion, Jordan, if I can be honest with you, a lot of this emotion comes from the fact that I have seen the Bears, not just with Pace, but Angelo did this too, and Emery did this too, and Poles is the first Bears GM that I have seen depart from the standard of just pushing the chips back in, right? Like, okay, if I can't bet my house now, I can bet my next mortgage. And they will. They'll push everything in on, and they won't control their betting, if you will. They'll say Jimmy Graham's going to be the key that drives this offense. They'll say it's worth next year's 3rd, or maybe it was a 4th, to get Anthony Miller this year. He's going to be it. And it feels as if let's take an example, Jordan. After the Bayless pick, Ryan Poles seemed to take a breath. Entered day 3 with the plan of just trade back like crazy, draft a ton of players, and if any of them are valuable and helpful, thank God. And who's to say what we have in Ja'Tyre Carter? Zach Martin apparently caught somebody's eye, and he's on a separate roster now. Good for him. Rip us. But Braxton Jones was not the Bears' first choice. He was not the guy who they bet everything on because they traded back a couple of times. And so within that, maybe the Bears have found a cheap left tackle in the 5th round, which is a round that I generally consider to be literal lottery picks. I know there's a lot of people that, okay, in my opinion, it's 100% just my opinion, right? 1st round, you're looking for a Pro Bowler. 2nd round, you're looking for a starter. 3rd round, you're looking for a role player. 4th round, you're looking for quality depth. 5th, 6th, 7th, you're looking for anything you can get, whatever that looks like. It's 100% just like back of the napkin draft talk, right? But it's a way that I attempt to categorize the value of what I'm looking for. And Jordan, it's the reason that Bayless didn't bother me, because in the 3rd round, you're looking for a role player. And I looked at Bayless Jones and thought, the worst option in the 3rd round is when you try to get a starter in the 3rd round, and it turns out that, oh gosh, what was the kid's name? The Steeler, the Jonathan Bullard just isn't very good, right? At that point, like it's not a waste. I think people use the term waste of a pick way too often. But I look at somebody like Bayless and think, okay, he's got a little bit of burst. He's got, like, when the ball's in his hands, he's better with it than Dante Pettis, than Equanimeous St. Brown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I look at all this, and it's not like I'm sitting here trying to beat my chest and be like, I was on the Bayless pick. It's more like, to me, a 3rd round wide receiver, you're hoping that they're like your wide receiver 4 and they play a decent role. Jordan, to use an example, to me, the Bears were looking for Mecole Hardman like value out of not a 2nd round pick. And so to me, they're starting to get it here at the end of his rookie season. And if you said that with blinders on about, or not looking at age, not looking at it, like all kinds of the things that people wanted to dock Bayless for, if I told you rookie wide receiver X, rookie 3rd round wide receiver X blew his hamstring out, not literally, but like he had a hamstring issue that kept him out of pretty much all of camp and the first 2 weeks of practice. He had playbook issues. And finally, at the end of the season, he started to show some versatility and value where it seems like he caught up to the NFL speed. Is that a story you haven't heard before? Is this uncommon? Right? I'm not trying to make the argument that Bayless is going to be a superstar. He sure shouldn't be. Like, Bayless should be way down the pecking order of what the Bears have offensively, but he is exactly the kind of person that I would hope the Bears have just enough other weapons that when they do hit a jet sweep to 12, the defense doesn't have the assets to pay extra attention to him, and he's able to get ripped 12 yards running an end around where people remember, oh, shoot, this guy's actually pretty fast. It's gadgetry, and I get that. And I understand that team building isn't, I mean, it's not that simple, right? And that I'm a Bears fan. So it is easily my bent to look for the good in any situation. Turu, you mentioned there's no guarantee Braxton Jones will improve or even stay the same. There's no guarantee, but at the same time, generally speaking, an offensive lineman doesn't play his best football as a rookie. It's just not common. That's not to say that it's a guarantee he'll get better, for sure. But it's not poor to say that when Braxton Jones finishes the season, as I think fairly confidently the Bears' 2nd best offensive lineman of the year, that's pretty good for a 5th round rookie. And Barely exactly 41 yards on an end around is even better. 47 yards in a deep pass is even better. Going all the way back to Dallas. Let's remember, this is like, I made sure to highlight it, like, Bayless Jones stacked his corner in 15 yards in Dallas. And had he caught that ball, Bears fans would have been screeching, which would have been awesome. I hear you, Drex. I mean, you got to remember that when you focus on the Steve Smiths and when you focus on the Tom Brady's, Patrick Mahomes doesn't look like a good pick anymore, right? Like, it is easy to take a look at former Hall of Fame scenarios and say, well, I mean, you know, they picked Antonio Brown in the 6th round, so Darnell Mooney sucks. That's just not normal, right? So it's you get what I'm saying, don't you? I hear you, Drex. Like, I thank God it's satire, because there are a lot of people that really do think that way. There are a lot of people that really do look at the fact that it's like, oh yeah, well, in the 3rd round, the Seahawks took Abraham Lucas, who was one of #myguys. And so really the Bayless Jones pick is a huge failure because one of the best players in the draft was right there and they didn't pick him. You're not wrong, but if we start grading the draft by every single person that I'm sure you're right, Reinhardt, that I bet the Bears think he's a little bit of like, to cut to the bone. I don't think the Bears are super satisfied with him. I think that the Bears expected him to take more snaps. and that they frankly expected him to do a little bit more. I mean, Reinhardt, you want to talk about the land of opportunity. When Mooney went down, Bayless was basically pressed into duty, and he still got outperformed by Dante Pettis, by Equinemius St. Brown, frankly, even at times by N'Keal Harry. That's just not good. But the idea would be that he's a rookie and that you keep going from there. It's very easy in these. Okay, so I was thinking about this, Reinhardt. So I caught a little bit of the Bills game, right? Which, granted, I actually don't know how it ended. So you guys are going to see me live look up the Bills' final score. I think they won. I mean, there was some stuff that kept showing up. Yeah, okay, they did win 23-35. But the main thing that I'm looking at is the more I keep watching other quarterbacks around the NFL, look, it's not this simple, right? But Reinhardt, you definitely notice Justin Fields' mistakes a lot more when the team is as bad as they are, which this isn't Fields' defense. This is me actually trying, like, as an analyst, to work through what I honestly think about some of these players, right? But then Josh Allen will let a ball rip that is way, way, way off target, or Kirk Cousins will miss his mark, which he really didn't today. So it's not like I'm trying to come after him. But Josh Allen played a horrible game against the Bears, but it's not as if he's been playing great ball over the last couple weeks. And Trevor Lawrence, who had some dirty, dirty throws, dirty throws, dirty throws, like between the 20s, still only put up 13 points in a key game against the Titans. Say what you will, but if Justin Fields did that, which, I mean, frankly, you could make the argument that happened in the Washington game, people would be all over him for missing Zay Jones like he did. And I can't help but think, Reinhardt, that not only is nobody perfect, but when your team is flat out bad, the mistakes look worse, right? Exactly, Reinhardt. So it's like, there's some of the stuff that, like you mentioned the other day, Reinhardt, you said, I'm not sure Fields is as accurate as you say. And let me be plain, Reinhardt. Pro Football Focus had Justin Fields rated as their most accurate college quarterback ever after or during the draft. The year after he was drafted, they overhauled that metric and showed him to be slightly below average in accuracy, which I thought was hilarious. You want to talk about a complete face change, go look it up. But the 2021 draft, they redid their quarterback accuracy chart, and suddenly Fields had moved. He was no longer the most accurate quarterback ever. And I think part of it is because he's always had this issue with short throws that I think is getting better, if only incrementally. That I think they were just discounting the short throw issues and looking at the fact that he was really solid intermediate to long, and they thought that was wild. Like, and by wild, I mean very, very accurate. So to your point, in this specific season, Justin Fields had to be perfect. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's more to say that in a season where the run game is even healthier, in a season where wide receivers are shaking that much more open, in a season where Justin Fields is more comfortable and trusts the guys he's throwing to, I'm very curious to see what he'll do. We can leave it at that. And with the Bears having the number one overall pick, it's exciting, very exciting time to be a Bears fan, I think, because let's see. Fields sprayed the ball short at OSU. Sprayed, you mean like inaccurate throws? Yes. Turu, Fields played better than expectations. I will tell you with an honest, let me see. There's a drastic difference between Peter and Boyle's short throws and Justin's, and it's hilarious. You mean different for the worse in Justin's case, and I agree with you, Reinhardt. I mean, it's not Justin's game, and I imagine it's a game that he's going to try to work on a little bit, but it's worth remembering that at OSU in particular, Reinhardt, there's a reason that Justin's check down was running the ball, and I think it's because he did not like to throw the ball short. Like, this is something that he's going to have to work on because, I mean, okay, so look, I'm not a quarterback mechanics expert, but when you take a look at how Justin Fields throws the ball, he throws it like a baseball player, full overarm. Well, baseball players, when they are throwing short, underhand the ball or flick the ball to each other. Like it's not that easy, right? And so his motion, in my opinion, is a two-sport motion that maybe he's just going to keep working on mechanics. It could just flat out get better over time because of that, but it's going to be an area that Fields just has to practice because short throws, whatever that short throw looks like, is just like, I mean, that's NFL ball. Like, that's the bread and butter of NFL quarterbacking, is playing like Nick Foles. You know what I'm saying? Like, a good quarterback in the NFL is Nick Foles plus, or Chase Daniel plus, and you're supposed to be able to do the Daniel stuff, and that's what Fields is getting better. I would honestly tell you, Reinhardt and any others, that in my opinion, Turu, when you say Fields played better than expectations, a game like the Bills game is way more important to me than a game like the Packers game. That Packers first half was firecracker, right? I mean, the throw to ESB, the throw to Harry, the throw to a whole bunch of the throws, a whole bunch of the runs. Fields was breaking the Packers in half over his knee. Incredible, right? But I'll tell you that in my opinion, from a down-to-down perspective, it was so much more important to see him go up against Buffalo and to see him manage the offense, check the ball down, hit Dante Pettis in the flat, which Pettis dropped, hit Cole Kmet on that rollout, which Cole Kmet couldn't handle. Like, I would rather see Fields as he moves forward, hitting timing throws, hitting short throws, checking the ball down, and everything in between, because it's great that he can hit those long bombs. It's great that he can put people in conflict. It's great that he may or may not be the most athletic, the most just electric athlete in the NFL. But the more boring quarterback stuff he can do, the more dangerous all that electricity is. Josh Allen learned it. He's an MVP candidate. Jalen Hurts learned it. He's an MVP candidate. Mahomes learned it. He should win the MVP. I don't actually think there is a question. I think Mahomes is the dude. He had statistically the best season ever, if I understand, from a yards per scrimmage, perspective, yards from scrimmage perspective. He should probably win. I don't actually think it's really an argument. But then when you look at the rest of it, like, to me, my favorite part of this season is that Justin Fields in the pocket doing all that boring stuff that I just talked about, protection schemes, stepping up pocket movement. The Lions game, pseudo notwithstanding, because that was just awful, we saw the arrow going up. And yes, we've talked before on this channel about how Justin Fields makes quarterback development look bizarrely linear. And that's really not the case. Like, it's not going to be linear. This Lions game is a great example of that, but it won't surprise me if a whole bunch of people go, wow, Justin Fields has really developed. If over the course of this offseason, the Bears add a whole bunch of talent to this offense and talent to this defense, and suddenly they come out and win a solid amount of games next year. They also may not. Look at the Bengals. Look at the Jags. It takes a while for this stuff to gel sometimes, but we'll have to see. Jordan, you mentioned who's my coach of the year. Look, I'm going to have to look it up. It's just blunt. Okay, so Jordan, I hate to tell you, because in my opinion, I think coach of the year is a silly award. In most of these cases, I think coach of the year goes to the team that improved the most. I don't think people think about it that hard. Like Reinhardt, you mentioned Daboll should get it. I think you're probably right that Daboll should get it. I think there's a chance that people vote for Peterson, because remember, it's voter based. And Peterson just had the Jags make the playoffs with a massive rush at the end, winning, 7 out of their last 6 games. Like, I'm here. I think Daboll should win it. I think what Daboll's done in New York is amazing. Jordan, I agree with you. What I'm trying to tell you is, if you asked me who the actual best coach is, I don't think that's who draws the votes. So that's not the opinion, right? I think it's just a matter of a whole bunch of voters voting for who they think is the hottest one. Honestly. And I think Peterson ended on the flashiest note possible. I think Nick Sirianni is a great choice, John. Like, if you wanted my opinion, I think Andy Reid deserves some serious credit. If I had to pick coach of the year, Andy Reid has developed an offense that allowed Patrick Mahomes to flat out shine with wide receiving talent that is apparently able to spin in a circle and still get into the end zone. Jordan, I'm with you. I think Dan Campbell's another great option. Like, seriously, it is just a silly to me. It's not that I'm calling your question silly. It's that I think the award is kind of like comeback player of the year, right? Where are we actually going to take a look at who the comeback player of the year is? Or are we going and break it down? Or are we just going to emotionally go with who we think is the hottest coach, right? And I tend to, so you're asking me right on the heels of Jacksonville winning and getting into the playoffs out of absolutely nowhere, which I think is going to draw a lot of eyes. I think that what Daboll did in New York is flat out amazing. I think that what Dan Campbell has done in Detroit is awesome. It really is. There's actually quite a few options this year. But after 2018, I definitely learned that Coach of the Year is more of a who improved their record the most award. And so I'm curious to see who voters are going to go with. John, that's exactly the story, isn't it? Matt Nagy went back to his due. Like Matt Nagy went back to the Kansas City, and he's on his revenge path, isn't he? Let me check in on some scores. Looks like the Rams are tied. Giants are losing, but who's surprised? Broncos are spitting. The Cowboys are losing. Who's watching that game? Yikes. That's not what you want, is it? If you're Dallas, I have to technically record a podcast. This should be pretty short. But what a day. What a day so far. Bears get the number 1 overall pick. Bears are good to go. Like, Bears are in control of the offseason. It should be a fun one. Whatever happens. Let's see. Akusai, you mentioned, even though we had the worst record, I don't know that I'd call the Bears the worst team in the league. Our schedule ended up being unexpectedly brutal. Akusai, here's the other thing that I have to point out. Like, we were watching the Texans. The Texans were getting obliterated a ton throughout the course of the season. And I understand they caught on at the end, but it's worth mentioning, Akusai, that the Bears team that finished was without a doubt the worst team in the NFL. But the Bears team that finished was missing, I have to count, Darnell Mooney, Kyler Gordon, yeah, Kyler's included, Jalen Johnson, Eddie Jackson, Tevin Jenkins. Help, guys. Let me think. Jack Sanborn. Let me see. Like, look, I could keep going. Kendall Vildor counts because he was out. Like, basically the 10 most, I don't want to say most important, that's not fair, but like 7 of the probably 10 or 11 most important players. Lucas Patrick is there. Well, B team, they were missing an entire defensive line the entire season, so that's not new. Notice that in the tank game, the Bears the Bears defensive lineman probably came up to Matt Eberflus at the end of the season, said, okay, so you're sitting Kyler, you're sitting like basically everybody on offense, you're sitting Justin or any of us sitting, and Matt Eberflus looked back and said, "Now you guys are good. We're gonna be fine." Because I'm pretty sure the entire starting defensive line played anyways. But anyways, like you're saying, Turu, at the end of the season, a bad team was dramatically worse. Like and so at that point, there's no doubting in my mind. Like, there were people on Twitter, and I love and respect all of them. Everybody's great on Bears Twitter that were like, "Ooh, are we sure that the Bears are gonna beat the Vikings?" And I was like, "Yes, this Bears team will lose to anybody." But earlier in the season, like, I'm going to be honest, like the Bears, I'm convinced Ryan Poles thought that they were going to win 2 games out of the 3 games that they lost to Miami by 1, they lost to Detroit by 3, they lost to Atlanta by 3. I understand I'm being very specific on those 3 games, but the arrow was so far up. Be right back. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're catching up. The point is that Akusai, I'm actually with you, where I think that this Bears team ended up with a terrible record. They ended up with the number 1 overall pick, but I don't think they were the worst team in the NFL. And I do think that a couple of specific ads makes them a freaking lot better. I mean, don't quote me on it, but if we're talking about a Chicago Bears organization, and it's specifically like a Chicago Bears roster that brings functionally the same secondary back, they add Bobby Okereke and some studs on the defensive line, and then I don't know what they'll do on the offense. Like, there's a lot of options that will make them better, because there are a lot of pieces to this offense that are just flat out terrible, right? But Chase Claypool is starting to play his best football at the end of the season when he finally figured it out. Bayless is playing his best football at the end of the season. I think the Bears have an opportunity to add some juice at wide receiver. Look, it may not be exciting juice. It may be Jacoby Myers. It may be Alan Lazard, which I hear you, Jordan. I bet you're already thumbsing that down. Like, the Bears are going to add at receiver. Their receiver room is going to get better. It's just a matter of whether their receiver room is going to get good or not, and that's a separate question. Cole Kmet is coming along quite nicely. I think the offensive line needs some massive investment, and there's not like a bazillion great ways to do that at this point. Elton Jenkins was a great call, and he's off the market. So we'll have to see what happens. I mean, there's a lot to this. We'll go ahead and cover. I have to record a podcast here soon, but like you're talking about, Turu, you mentioned other than the first overall pick, do I think Poles will keep trending down last year as much as he can? Honestly, Turu, I do not know. Got to remember, Poles stood pat when he had the chance until that third day, or that day 3. So we'll see. I think a lot of this is going to come down to what goes on in free agency. And B team, like you mentioned, you think this team could be a 6 to 9 win team next year. I sure hope so. I mean, it's not as simple as, oh yeah, you add on the defensive line and the Bears go 12-5. Come on, guys. Like, 12-5 teams are really, really good. They've got tons of depth, like really, really strong organizations. But B team, like you're saying, I really don't think, assuming that Fields can take that same magic and channel it into, I don't know, the rest of his game. Like, as soon as he takes a year 3 step, so to speak, and if he can shake some of the bad habits that this season had started to form there at the very end, I think the Bears are well on their way to a season of, I don't want to say victory, but a lot better, like scrappier, more jagsy. Right. You mentioned like up closer, hoping to be closer to this year's Lions. I think it's going to be closer to this year's Jags. Right. B team, where the Lions are the number 1 offense in the NFL. They have been investing in these pieces for years, and it still took some luck to get there. With guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I believe were 3rd rounders. We were talking about the value of a 3rd rounder earlier. Apparently, you can get a wide receiver 1. I agree with you, Jordan. Like, I think Jacoby Myers rules. If that sounded like I was dunking on Myers, it's more me saying, Jordan, that in my opinion, if you had Jacoby Myers, Chase Claypool, and Darnell Mooney, you've got a 2, a 2, and a 2, and 3 2s is good. I mean, look at Jacksonville. I'm not trying to hammer Christian Kirk when I say that, like, 3 good receivers, man, a 4th, even more so, Shane. Like, 3 good receivers is a good thing. It's more to point out, Jordan, that, like, they are getting Jacoby Myers, getting Alan Lazard, who, in my opinion, would be like super Equinemius St. Brown. Like, to me, the Lazard ad, I think Lazard isn't as good as Aaron Rodgers makes him look like, but also I don't think, Jordan, that he just flat sucks. Like, I think Lazard does a lot of simple things for you, a lot of offensive things for you. And I look, I could go into his tape specifically, but I think he creates more subtle separation. Now, is Justin Fields willing to throw to somebody who creates subtle separation when he obviously loves more overt separation? I don't know. We're just gonna have to see. Right. But I will tell you that, let's see, John, you mentioned you're not sure we can keep the 3 wide receiver 2s together from a cap perspective. Jordan, it'd probably be like a 1-year thing largely, because I imagine that Darnell Mooney gets an extension and that Chase Claypool plays the year out. That's just my opinion. Right. Turu, is there history of Packers receivers coming to Chicago and playing better? Like, which Packer are you thinking of? But I will tell you that, in my opinion, they obviously want they want an ESB type role in this offense, that condensed set guy that's going to chip block, that's going to get back out and create separation underneath. And I do think Lazard would be better at that. Think of him as a scheme fit and not a Fields fit. Right now, the other question, didn't think there was any history, or didn't think there's a history of any receiver coming to Chicago and playing better yet, because I have noticed where they come to die in Chicago. But we'll see. And like you're saying, B team, I mean, you make a front nasty, whether it's time. Let's pretend, dream scenario, the Bears trade down after having bagged Deron Payne and Draymond Jones, which truly dream scenario at that point. At that point, you've got a good, solid little interior, and then you add a Tyree Wilson on the end, and then you rotate Travis Gibson and Dominique Robinson on the other one. That defensive line is dramatically better than what the Bears already have. Now, it would take some serious luck and some serious convincing because you'd have to win some major free agent battles just to make that happen at all. But at that point, you're talking about a solid defensive line that can, like you're saying, be opportunistic, create some turnovers. And then when you go and you play Kirk Cousins in the season after, all of the luck in the world propels them to a superstar record, then maybe things turn out differently. Hargrave more realistic over Payne. Good question, Turu. We'll get into that more in the offseason. For now, it behooves me to actually record a podcast. So let's record something relatively quick so that we can all get back to watching more football, because Chargers Broncos is heating up. Cardinals 49ers looks awesome. I love watching Purdy scrap. Rams Seahawks is super intriguing. Go Rams. The further Detroit falls, the better. Like, you want to talk about knocking a dynasty down a peg. It was not so long ago that Detroit had a top 3 pick and was racing to make the playoffs. If the Lions can make the playoffs, we want this. That drops their own pick. And if the Rams can beat the Seahawks, then even better, because I can't remember how far it drops them, but it pulls them down just a little bit, which we're down for. And then we've got, let's see, is it that if the Rams beat the Eagles, then Packers Lions on Sunday night is electric? Because that would be awesome. Like, I need to remember. Now, John, you mentioned the Seahawks playing bad. It seems like a late season standard at this point. I think Baker Mayfield has been freaking great. Like, I think he's just been fun. Like, you want to talk about a guy who's come to Los Angeles and just started hitting on a whole bunch of intangible things. Like, Baker Mayfield is playing quintessential quarterback. That doesn't mean that it makes the offense automatically good, but like, I'm seeing now that he just on 3rd and 6 hit a deep pass, which, like, oh, I need to relive that Texans game. That was a rip roaring good time. Yeah, hold up, let him bake. If Goff fails at the end, Turu, they might want to take and get a quarterback. I mean, it's possible, right? A trade down with the Lions would be dangerous, but like, that is chasing the dragon, because you want to talk about 2 in the hand, 1 in the bush, one in the hand, 2 in the bush. The Lions have 2 first-round picks this year, Turu. So you could theoretically be looking at trading back to, say, number 7, number 8, and also scooping up number 20, 21, 22 in the same year, which could turn the Bears around. I mean, you want to talk about like putting them where the Giants are at from a pedigree perspective? You'd very literally do that. Also, is this the game, as I understand it? I don't know how caught up on NFL memes you guys are, but is this the game, as I understand it, where Kenny Golladay is pushing for his first touchdown as a Giant in 2 years? Man, what a deal that was, right? And I agree, B-team. I think Baker's been great with McVay. Frankly, I think that Stafford's completely expendable at this point. And I really don't say that lightly. But Baker Mayfield has been so good in Los Angeles. I don't know why you wouldn't go with the younger, cheaper guy at this point and extend him to a smaller, slightly prove-it-y deal, even though you just handed some fat money to some fat money to Stafford. That's a conundrum that they'll have to figure out, and the Bears are happy to let them. So let me go ahead and start this podcast, and we will finish out so that we can go watch some more football. I'm going to pull up the box score here. Vikings, Bears. 3, 2. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. And boy, oh boy, what a game we have to recap, as the Chicago Bears have fallen to 3-14, while the Houston Texans finished out a glorious victory over the Indianapolis Colts, making your Chicago Bears the number 1 overall pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. What an unbelievable finish to the day, as the Bears effectively started to deliberately tank as hard as they possibly could. They certainly did their part. We'll break that down in a hot moment, but I have to spend a little bit of time talking about the emotions of going through this Texans game, because the Texans and the Colts square up. Obviously, if you're following the subtext of the conversation, the Texans want to lose, lock in the number one overall pick. Certainly their owner does. And then the Colts, on the other hand, should they lose, not only keep the number one pick out of a division rival's hands, but they get potentially open up an opportunity to trade into the number one. Well, Texans go up early. They're up 24-14, if memory serves. The Colts battle back, get to 31-24. If you're like me, you thought, well, the game's over. Pack it in. Bears are getting number two overall. But the Texans and Davis Mills roar back from 21 or from down 24-31. Not only convert a 4th and 10 to Brandon Cooks down the sidelines for 30 yards, not only convert a miracle 4th and 20 to keep the game alive, but then the Texans decide to go for 2 and they get it, taking a 32-31 lead that then Lovie Smith is able to put the clamps on poor Sam Ehlinger and crush the game out, ultimately sending the Bears to number one overall. Now, exciting, electric, puts the Bears well in control of this offseason and should make for some wonderful, wonderful content as me and the Windy City Gridiron crew go through building the board, a brand new series that me, Jeff Burkus, and a couple of other scouts are going to be starting here in a little while, where we are going to put together a Bears-specific draft board, top to bottom, doing this thing as thoroughly as possible. And it should be a great time over on our YouTube channel, Second City Gridiron. Be sure you're tuning in and keep an eye out for what's going on the site. But then when it comes to the Bears, I mean, I wish I had a more interesting game to break down to you, but the real intrigue in this game was just to what depths the Chicago Bears were willing to go to make sure they lost. So you probably already know that the Bears had ruled out Justin Fields before this game even kicked off. They ruled out Kyler Gordon at the last second. So now you've got no starting quarterback. You got no starting corners. The Kendall Vildor, Jalen Johnson, and Kyler Gordon all out. The Bears are starting a bunch of guys that maybe you didn't even know were on the roster. They leave Brisker in, but they basically sit everybody else. They sit Braxton Jones. They sit any relevant offensive lineman. They pull Cody Whitehair in the second quarter, and they started Nathan Peterman, but apparently he played too well, opening the game up with just enough yardage to threaten that the Bears called to go for a 4th down at their there's a bunch of weird stuff that happened in this game, one of which was going forward on 4th and 7, only down 6 at the Minnesota 40. And when they didn't get it, bummer, I guess they're still losing. Look, any other day, it looks like an aggressive call, but when Nathan Peterman is chucking the rock on 4th and 7 at the 40, yeah, I get it. It's not a time when you want to punt. Yeah, I get it. You think your defense may not be able to hold, but you look at just some of the ways that this game worked, like the second drive of the game where the Bears got to Minnesota's 28, the 3rd and 6, on Minnesota's 28, clearly you're in field goal range, down 6-0. They take a sack. They lose 6 yards. Now they're at the 34. And for some reason, on 4th and 12, they decide to line up as if they're going to go for it. Nathan Peterman calls an audible, asks for the ball, and doesn't get it. The Bears take a delay of game, move from the 34, back 5 yards, and now they have to punt from there, which the Texans, it looks like didn't even, or not the Texans, the Vikings didn't even take the delay of game call. So then the Vikings just come out and let them punt from the 34. The Bears give the ball away. Look, is it out of the question that might have been outside of Cairo Santos's range? I guess not, but it almost looked as if the Bears were trying to voluntarily move out of field goal range so that they could further justify the punt. And then Nathan Peterman picks up just a few too many yards. So the Bears decide that they're going to change plans. They pull their quarterback, Nathan Peterman, that had been with them all season. They go with Tim Boyle instead, who they picked up just a couple of weeks ago when Trevor Siemian hurt his oblique. And he immediately responds with an interception to Chase Claypool that all but locks things in. The Vikings take a commanding 16-0 lead, and the Bears respond with a touchdown here and there. But with Nick Mullins coming in the second half and scoring a touchdown, leading to another touchdown later down the road, the Vikings cruise to a win. Look, if you ask me, this was like watching a preseason game. I mean, from the feel of things, yes, there was everything on the line, but only if the Bears won this game, so much to the point where it felt to me an unbiased, or I don't know, trying to be as unbiased as I can analyst, like the Vikings starting around the mid first quarter started to just work situations. The Vikings wanted to run the ball because they're trying to get prep for the playoffs. The Vikings wanted to throw the ball specifically to KJ Osborne because they wanted to plan for a world in which Justin Jefferson isn't the number one threat. They just got smoked by the Packers because they've been leaning on Justin Jefferson all season long. And it seemed as if they came out in this game specifically looking to work alternate situations to prep for the playoffs. I mean, it was bizarre to me to watch as a team in the playoffs completely took the win for granted. And the other team in Matt Eberflus's Bears, I mean, going all the way back to the touchdown that they had, which we'll talk about Bayless Jones in just a moment. But so Bayless Jones scores this touchdown, end around 41 yards, barely stays in bounds, rips down the sidelines, scores. Exciting. The Bears then line up for the PAT, and the Vikings take a penalty on the PAT. It escapes me what it is because it's not actually written down, right? But the Bears accept this penalty. They then switch to a 2-point conversion. The PAT went through, so they pass on the made PAT to then move up and call a goal line fade to Cole Kmet. Goal line fades obviously having a notoriously low conversion percentage. And I mean, you ask me, and it started to feel like Matt Eberflus was deliberately taking points off the board just to be sure they locked this thing in. I mean, look, the difference in attitude between the way the Chicago Bears treated this game, pulling Cody Whitehair in the second quarter along with Nathan Peterman, so that you had suddenly an offensive line of, I don't even remember who was playing left tackle, to be honest. But somebody was. Alex Leatherwood was the guard. You had Sam Mustipher at center. You had Larry Borum at right guard. And you had Riley Reif at right tackle. Like, this Bears team I don't want to say they didn't try, but it really was like watching a preseason game with player rotation. And anytime anybody did much, they took them out of the game. Now, as far as evaluating it like a preseason game, this does mean we got live NFL reps from plenty of guys. Two guys that I feel like really did, look, I don't want to say stand out. That makes it sound like they played super duper well. But personally, I thought Cole Kmet looked really solid. I thought Chase Claypool looked really solid. I thought Bayless Jones looked really solid in their own ways. Claypool's routes looked snappy, going all the way back to that interception that Tim Boyle threw in the late second quarter. I thought Chase Claypool ran a really wonderful 7-stop and generated some serious separation against a cover 3 corner that didn't see it coming. Look, it's a basic route, and that's exactly the kind of route that you want to win with cover 3, but it was a good route nevertheless, and good to see from somebody that the Bears now officially gave up pick number 32 to get. Awfully expensive, but hey, sunk cost is a sunk cost. Now it's just about whether or not he's a good player. Cole Kmet seems to be hitting the mark. Like, he's sure in some cases, it's not like he looks like the most fluid hip tight end on the planet, but he's battling through tackles. He's making plays happen. And I'm using a bunch of, I don't know, very football-ese words, but Cole Kmet's playing well. I need to look at the tape to see his blocking again. His blocking's been so-so, especially in an off season where he may very well get an extension if Ryan Poles sees him as a part of the future. But it's been nice to see him come alive in an offense that really likes its tight ends. We all know the name Robert Tonyan, and outside of Green Bay, maybe we shouldn't have, but Tonyan's been good enough to make that offense work. I thought Bayless Jones in particular has started to, so it was nice to see him make a catch down on the sidelines. We love it when Bayless does anything normal wide receiver like, but I'll also tell you that Bayless has been electric with the ball in his hands all season long. And I feel like there are a lot of people that have wanted to make that pick a bust more than the pick has been a bust itself. We're talking about pick number 71. This would be like if somebody was calling a 4th round pick a bust. Not quite. Obviously, the 3rd round isn't literally the 4th round, but we're not talking about a 2nd rounder where I would generally consider that to be a starter choice. We're talking about somebody who's trying to be a role player at this stage. And I feel like Bayless Jones at this stage could easily be the end-around specialist wide receiver 4 that adds a speed dynamic, a lateral speed dynamic, that if you don't tackle him, he will step right around everybody and race into the end zone with relative ease. He's also started doing damage on special teams as a kick returner, which is awfully nice to see. And if I told you the story of a rookie wide receiver that injured his hamstring so much to the point where he missed all weeks of training camp and then 2 weeks of the season, and then I told you that that receiver took a little bit longer than anybody expected to get online with the offense, I don't think you'd be surprised. It's just that when Bayless is a 25-year-old wide receiver and doesn't immediately make an instant impact, it's easy to get frustrated. Look, I understand the dilemma that the Bears put fans in this offseason. I don't want to be blind to it. But I'll tell you that here on the Windy City Gridiron Podcasting Network, not to trot out an I told you so style of story, but we've been saying this was going to be a tough year for an awfully long time. It was. I mean, watching Justin Fields get sacked at a rate higher than David Carr's 14.6% sack rate. Instead, Fields got sacked 55 times, if I'm pulling the numbers off my head correctly, for a percentage-based drop back of 14.7. So 0.1% more than David Carr got sacked in Houston was hard. I mean, watching that Lions game last week was hard. Does the number one overall pick make it all worth it? That depends on what they do with it. But I will say that I think that this opens up a world of possibilities for the Chicago Bears organization that were not open as of even just a few weeks ago. I mean, you want to talk about the hero of the day. Chicago may not build statues for Davis Mills and Lovie Smith, but they deserve a ton of credit for whatever the Bears are able to put around Justin Fields, because I personally think that at number one overall, the Bears are holding an open auction for quarterback one, and that a lot of teams are going to be awfully interested. But at number two, even just one spot later, assuming the Texans took a quarterback, now you're hoping that another team had another quarterback at number one overall, or like number one overall on their board, and see you need to trade up for with the Bears. There was a decent chance that the Bears would have been quote unquote stuck just taking, admittedly, a very good player in either Anderson, like Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, or maybe even Tyree Wilson. But I digress. The point is that with the Bears now reaching number one overall, they are as set as you're going to get. When the Bears set out to tank this season, if I had told you in a WCG forum, on Twitter, or wherever you may or may not interact with me, that I thought the Bears were going to attempt to develop Justin Fields while also tanking, you would have told me that those two things can't coexist. That if Justin Fields took a step forward, it was impossible that he doesn't win a couple of games and therefore result in and ultimately results in the number one pick. And yet that's exactly what we're looking at. The Justin Fields dragged a poor Bears offense to decent standing in points per game rankings. Let me look up what that is. But as he got to that point, he also lost, 7 out of 8 one-score games, but the Bears took 3 home. Look, at the end of the day, I can make all kinds of arguments. To me, the fact that the Bears were able to drag themselves into as many one-score games as they were, with Justin Fields showing development, even in games like Buffalo, where I thought he played really well near the end of the season. I thought that he played relatively well in Philadelphia. I thought that the weeks before that, before the bye, his first half against Green Bay was the stuff of legends. We've seen flashes of development, and I think he will need better support around him to be a little bit more consistent. This is the same story that Josh Allen dealt with during 2019, when the Bills didn't particularly invest much around him either, but you add Stephon Diggs and some offensive line upgrades, and suddenly you have an MVP candidate. The Bears will obviously be hoping for more of the same. This should be a really interesting offseason, and this doesn't need to be a particularly long podcast, so I'm not going to make it one. But what I can tell you is that the Bears closed out a season that, look, down the line, I imagine this is a season we aren't really going to want to remember any more than we have to, but now it's over. Now the fun of this Chicago Bears team has begun. The 2023 offseason should be flat out fun. The 2023 season should be flat out fun, assuming that we can all take a breath and enjoy a very Jags-like season, Lions-like season, a scrappy team, a Giants team that's trying to win as many games as it can, whatever vehicle that looks like, because the idea that they're going to hit on all of their ads and that all of those ads are going to jump in year one and look amazing feels a little bit far-fetched, but it should be an awfully fun time to be a Bears fan. I know I'm very, very excited about it because Davis Mills and Lovie Smith have handed the Bears a first overall pick on on a silver platter, and I, for one, cannot wait to see them take it. This should be a great time. Won't surprise me if the Bears will, I don't want to say immediately, but over the next couple weeks, that they'll start prepping for some kind of pre-draft trade. The number one overall pick seems like the kind of pick that doesn't need to wait until draft day to ultimately get dealt, especially since some team or other will want to make sure that they can start planning on having that number one overall pick. It makes a big difference to them. But those will be dominoes that have to fall over the next couple weeks. My team, and by team I mean building the board team, will be with you over the next couple weeks, starting to get you prepped for draft season. That's going to be big. Free agency will obviously be big, but whether Nathan Peterman, whether Dante Pettis, whether we know Equinemius St. Brown's been re-signed, but Justin Jones, Cody Whitehair, Larry Borum, Sam Mustipher, the fate of so many of these 2022 Chicago Bears may not be with the team in the future. So there's only so much discussion that we really gain talking about whether Harrison Hand played a solid game or not. We can talk about Duke Shelley, where it felt like he played a solid game in and of like given what his role was, but it was a strange football game to watch top to bottom. And especially if you, like me, had the Bears and the Texans game pulled up simultaneously, the Texans one kept grabbing your eye because it was a flat out electric football game, especially given what was on the line. What a strange football game to watch. But all the same, what a fun offseason this is shaping up to be. The Bears have a quarterback. Probably. Obviously, we're going to have to endure quite a bit of conversation about now that the Bears have the number one overall pick. Should they use it to draft a quarterback? Look, my opinion is that they shouldn't, but I think that the engagement and the noise around potentially drafting a quarterback is exactly the kind of conversation that draws value for the number one overall pick. That's the conversation that ultimately leads you to being able to trade it for that much more. And if the Bears, wherever they go, can get a future number one, can get a top 5 pick, and can also get a second round pick as they go, it'll be awfully great to see. But that's going to do it for me. Again, as soon as next week, keep an eye out for building the board. More draft content will be coming at you from Windy City Gridiron. Free agency content. All 20 Tuesday will still be a thing. We're likely switching the cadence to every other week, but that's all right. We'll have plenty to talk through. We'll look at Bears schemes. We'll look at not Bears schemes. We'll look at football, whatever, in any way, honestly, that I find interesting. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Truly another season in the books. Always amazing seeing you fans' response. And until next time, Bears fans, bear down, and thanks so much for bearing with me. Twinquist, you are exactly right. I like to think that Mustipher and Whitehair can clean out their lockers today, though I will tell you that Sam Mustipher must have some kind of a Ouija board that he uses to maintain his Chicago Bearsness, because he's been on this roster for an awfully long time. And it's bizarre. Draco, we probably will do draft film. I got to figure out what that's going to look like, because from a monetization perspective, every time I pop up draft film, it demonetizes me. But that doesn't matter. That just means that we'll have to control when our draft streams are. And frankly, draft streams may be easier because I'm just watching so much draft film right now that it's easy to it's very easy for me to just pop up a stream and show you guys what I'm looking at. The problem is that if Draco, anybody, which this is like the ethic, or like this is exactly how draft thinking works, says, hey, it's great you like him, but what do you think about this player? The answer is probably, I haven't watched him yet. So right now I'm making it all the way through the Senior Bowl roster, which is taking some effort, but we got football to watch, friends. So I'm going to cut this and get it up on Windy City Gridiron. Are there any questions that I can answer right before we go? This is the most engagement that I think I've ever had, looking at the wonderful 82 of you that are still here, the peak of 100 on a Bear With Me episode, though we may have had upwards of 120-ish after like the New England game or something. I think that one was wild. And we were just like, but what a season. Honestly, it's a season we all wanted to end, and it's a season that ended the right way. Let's see. Akusai, you mentioned name my honorary Chicago. I'm going to lean back in my chair. Name my honorary Chicago Bears tank commander. Okay. There are a couple great names here. ISM directly. Yes, like John says, if you're enjoying the stream, give it a like. Liking the stream is always helpful. let's see. So ISM gets a major shout out at this case. Like the fact that he blew a game entirely by himself is really amazing. Let's see. You posted a good list on the Discord to refresh my memory. Let me see here. Going over to, is it in general? Um, is it in general football? Let's see. Where is it? Oh, yeah. Ultimate vote for Tank Commander. Let's see. I'll read your whole list. ISM for being a Vikings double agent. Bayless for 2 muff punts that kill games on their own. Santos for mixed extra points that resulted in losses. Pettis Mooney for drops against the Commanders. Coaching staff for turtling up in the second half of winnable games. Poles for trading away all of our defensive talent. Lovey for bringing it home. So let me think. I would probably, if it was me, vote for Bayless Jones purely because Akusai, 3 pretty critical losses were massively helped by big Bayless fumbles. Where if memory serves, like if I'm remembering it correctly, the Bears, let's see, it was Washington where he muffed a punt. It was Giants where he muffed a second punt. And then his fumble, was it in the Eagles game or was it the Packers game? I think it was the Eagles game, right? Where the Bears were rolling and Bayless fumbled at that point and everybody got very mad. But it might have been the Packers, honestly. Like I cannot remember. So Bayless managed to show upside, but to your point, Akusai, like Bears, let me see, like, oh, hey, Ravi, how you doing? But so, like, it's just wild to think that, like, Bayless Jones in particular, just like you're saying, J2K, he tries very hard, but his worst plays of the season were debatably some of the most impactful plays of the season. And to me, that makes him the commander. Now, I will tell you that in my opinion, and I am a conspiracy theory hat wearing crazy fan. So don't listen to me if you don't want to. But I will tell you this. The Chicago Bears entered this game. They played, let me see. The Chicago Bears played Nathan Peterman. When Nathan Peterman wasn't playing well, or like badly enough, they pulled Peterman so that he couldn't get in a rhythm, and they played Tim Boyle instead. And the moment Tim Boyle started to get into a rhythm, they pulled him again and put Peterman back out there. And then they pulled Peterman again and they put Boyle back out there. I mean, either bad quarterback had no chance at that point to build any momentum. And here's what I will say, okay? If the Bears were willing to blatantly throw a game, there's no telling whether they were blatantly willing to throw others. Like it's not that I'm trying to say they did, but like I said at the time, Luke Getsy's decisions in the second half of the Packers game were wild. Like the Bears were destroying the Packers. And I know I've said it tongue in cheek, but I can't emphasize that I mean it. Like the Luke Getsy in that second half of the Packers pivoted the offense all the way away from Fields. And the one play he gave Fields found that 3rd and 10 conversion to Cole Kmet that kept the drive alive. I mean, Fields was having the best day of his life, so much so that it felt like the Packers, or like it felt like Luke Getsy had to break out a fire extinguisher and roll the offense through literally anybody else, or the Bears were just going to steamroll a team that in their eyes they needed to lose to. Look, I'm not saying it's that simple, right? I am saying that the Bears did a ton of stuff, like a ton of no, J2K, you're thinking of the wrong Packers game. I'm talking, unless we're talking about the same one. I'm talking about the one right at the bye. Like, in my opinion, J2K, as soon as as soon as the Bears traded for Claypool and then they lost, and then everybody got hurt at MetLife, I think that there's a reasonable chance that the Bears front office and staff had a bunch of meetings that basically they all came together and said, winning is not going to help us at this point. Like, because you may be right, Lunatic. They could just be morons, but I will tell you with an open and honest like expression that it is bizarre to me that the Bears were steamrolling the Packers as badly as they were and suddenly decided to not just run the ball, but to deploy a bunch of run stuff that they'd never done before as if they were practicing, right? Maybe they thought it would work, but they didn't do a bunch of their tried and true stuff. Jordan, you talked about this earlier in the season, but I am not blind to the fact that the Bears' best PA designs, like Bears' best play action designs in terms of what their routes were doing, were in the preseason. Like, I mean, and it is fun, right, Robbie? Like, but do you know what I'm saying, Jordan? Where it's like, it's not lost on me that the Bears have better stuff. They just didn't use it in this season. And so much so that the Bears became known for these second half collapses where look, obviously, it sounds like the most fan thing you can possibly say, right? Where you say out loud, "Oh, I think the Bears offensive coordinator was throwing it on purpose and that they'll have a better offensive coordinator, like a better offensive setup next year because they won't be trying to tank." But at the same time, like that's like super pro fan stuff. Like the idea that the Bears would be that far ahead of the curve just sets expectations poorly for next year. So I get that we can't do that, but I'm still thinking it, to be honest with you. Like, I'm trying to draw a line between fantasy and fact where we take an earnest look at what happened in this season. Because J2K, you mentioned how far back does it go? I don't think it's ridiculous for the Bears to have looked at it and said, we just got to get through this Packers game. The Eagles and the Bills are going to beat us. And then it'll be like the Lions who are on the come up. And then like the Lions are on the come up and the Vikings are good and they'll have something to play for. I can't say for sure, but I can say the Bears got flat out blatant here in the last game of the season. Like somebody said earlier, the Texans and the Colts staffs were not trying to tank. But I will tell you, Eric, it's hilarious that I agree with you. Excellently executing a tank is a good sign for their competency. Like I know it's ridiculous, isn't it? But it's a bizarre and weird way to think about the idea that if the Bears were aiming to tank, well, they got the first overall pick and they locked their way into the second overall pick pretty early. Like they did tank well. It's just, what did it cost? The hope would be it didn't cost much with Justin Fields because these things all cost something, right? Were we winless after you have your super optimistic meatball look at their schedule on the stream a while back? I did a couple of those, Akusai, so I can't say for sure, but they definitely, like, if we were talking right after the Dallas game, I can't remember if it was after the Dallas or the New England game, but eventually they did go super winless. Let's see. Tanking isn't illegal, right? So Turu, that's the question. Did the Dolphins had to forfeit their first round pick this year because of tanking? The question becomes, was it because of tanking, Turu, or in your opinion, is it because Flores accused the Dolphins of tanking? So is it that they tanked and Goodell's not cool with tanking, or is it that they tanked and then Flores filed suit to the NFL and Flores had a point? And so basically the Dolphins ended up getting forfeited, or like forfeiting a pick, not because they like it, you get the idea. Like, is it because they got in trouble and somebody filed suit, or is it because they were tanking? And if it's the latter, the Bears might be in legit trouble. If it's the former, then I think the staff may be partially in on it. Like you're saying, John, somebody has to tell you that they were tanking. ML, you mentioned earlier, like coach told Mooney to drop it, then catch the pass at the goal line, told Fields to go out there and fumble. That's what happened. No, that's my point. Like ML, that's what I'm trying to say. I think that it was a standard front office based tank early in the season, but that later in the season, that like way later, starting in the Packers game, that I think they at least started to think about it, because I think this whole staff has job security. Yes, film. Like Flores got fired because he refused to tank. let's see. Bears fans, what if Washington says to us, go to sign Deron Payne, trade him? Hang on. I need to read that again. Let's see. First, which is secondly, currently a 14, a second, and a third this year, and next year. First, would I take it? Hang on. So they say go sign Deron Payne and trade him their first this year, which is currently a 14, a second, and a third this year and next year first. So hang on. Would that be we're trading what, George? Oh, Scott, that's interesting. So that's why they forfeited, not that. Let me see. So basically, what I'm trying to say, ML, is that as crackpot as I think it sounds, like I can't help but look at this end of the season and think that there's some tankage afoot, and I'm glad. I guess ultimately, I'm glad the Bears did it. I don't know where it started. I have a guess, right? Oh, like a sign and trade, George. I think most teams don't do that. Like, especially given that the cap gets so tight that I have to think that Washington isn't going to try to sign and trade him. Scott, if you're still here, you said if I'm picking first overall, who do I pick? First of all, I almost assuredly trade down. In my opinion, this is the perfect trade down pick. It's the ideal one. If you made me pick right now, it's Carter. Yes, I understand everybody's got motor concerns. Yes, I understand everybody's got character concerns. Yes, I understand all kinds of concerns that people have about Jalen Carter. His ceiling is too high. He fits the defense too well. I don't have the guts to take Wilson at 1. That would feel way too Kayvon Walker to me. I think Anderson rules. I think Anderson is awesome. I think Carter is so much better a scheme fit. And Turu, maybe here's the most important piece of the puzzle. I think that there's a lot to some of these guys where once they establish themselves as top 5 NFL picks, that probably take it easy. Like a little bit. I mean, look at JSN. I mean, Jordan, you make fun of JSN stuff, but it's like I find it hard to believe. You guys know me. If you follow my streams, I'm always willing to say something ridiculous, even if it has no bearing in fact at all. If I think it might be closer than we think. And JSN missing almost an entire season due to hamstring issues after catching 1,600 yards in an Ohio State offense where both of his teammates got drafted in the first round seems awfully coincidental to me. Almost like a player that knew he didn't have to play didn't. I mean, you can't just opt out, right? Like Nick Bosa going back in the day. You have to find, you know me, Quantum, truly. You have to find an injury that you can sit back and skip the season on. You can't just skip the season or everybody calls you a quitter. And so to me, with Carter, with JSN, some of these guys establish themselves so early that, I mean, Donald, you say that, but when you go 110% in college, you risk injury. Not that you don't risk injury otherwise, but I don't know. Let me see. Ash to Rainbows, I don't think I understand the question, but I appreciate the comment all the same. Scott, I'll be at the Senior Bowl. So feel free if you're going, that could be great. Let's see. You give up, let's come around and say in the 20s, but only if we trade back. Yeah, J2K, I'm not looking to draft JSN at 5. That's for sure. But so Demond, you mentioned that you think Carter's overrated. He just doesn't have the stats to match what everybody says. I don't actually disagree with you. To me, I'll openly tell you guys, I am disappointed if we have to pick at number 1. Can I be clear enough about that? If the Bears actually have to pick at number 1, I'm disappointed. And so to me, it's I don't know. It's not that I don't think Jalen Carter's good. It's not that I don't think that it's not that I don't think Will Anderson is good. It's not that I don't think Tyree Wilson is good. It's that I think there's there's enough quarterbacks to make this draft super intriguing, and that the Bears can trade back, gain a lot of picks, and still get an elite defender. Maybe they're not the defender of defenders, like Chase Young, right? But a very, very good, like a very, very good player. ML, thank you for saying that. So let's see, gutting the roster early, sure, that could be considered a tank. I think the Bears tried to win every game until they were out of contention and until the injury game. Yes, yes, ML, I'm there with you. I think that the front office tanked, meaning gutted the roster, right? I think that then after the game in New Jersey, where everybody got hurt, that they started thinking about it. Anything before then isn't a tank. It was a tank, which you said it for fun to us, right? But you and I are on the same page, ML, where I don't think that the staff did anything other than trying to win. Until the moment that they let me see, like, yeah, so I don't think they tried to do anything other than win until the moment that everybody was hurt. And suddenly, what are you gonna do? But I don't know. Let's see, Donald, you mentioned I'd take Breesy or Wilson after a trade back every day and twice on Sunday rather than taking one of Will Anderson or JC at one. Yeah, the more that I think about it, Donald, I am in the same place. I would draft Bryce Young almost. No, I wouldn't. I can't finish that sentence and be serious. Like I want to, but like I can't get there. But so to me, it's also worth mentioning, Jordan, that I think that there are a lot of people that think that the Chris Jones types of the world are literal every down superstars. We are still talking about a 21-year-old 3T. Like, it's not that simple. To me, John, like not to go at you. It's more like I think that there are a lot of people that keep wanting to not look at. I think we're almost scared of looking at Jalen Carter and saying he's raw, because if he's raw, maybe he's like, I don't know, going to be bad, like you're suggesting. I think that there are plenty of these players that ascend, that they start to really hit their apex of like man on man play at like 25 years old. So while I understand that for somebody like Jalen Carter, that means that you may draft him and he really may only come alive in the late part of the season. Look at Kayvon Walker. Like in Jacksonville, as much as I would have bagged on the pick, Kayvon Walker is starting to look like a very good edge rusher. And like, yeah, Quinnen Williams and Jeffrey Simmons are much the same way. Like, I can't help but think that an NFL strength and conditioning program and better technique is going to allow Jalen Carter to turn into every bit the 3-tech prospect that I think he's going to be. Stats be darned in college. I mean, I don't think Aaron Donald, if he had the stats that obviously he showed that he's had in the NFL, like, well, that's the thing, right, John? Like, not to get too distracted, but Aaron Donald was medium raw in college. And because I hear you, but I think as people start to value interior defensive linemen a little bit more, that the price for drafting one goes up, especially when he's just insane. Let me see. So, John, you mentioned, who are we talking about? Like, are you talking about JSN? Like, the ankle, or are you talking about Jalen Carter? Did Jalen Carter have an ankle issue? Am I not the expert that I think I am? Let's see. Carter just isn't just a motor cue. Like, pass rush moves aren't advanced, and his base issues raise anchor questions. So, Donald, that is a big question. I got to be honest with you, because like there's some of that stuff that I almost want to explain away. Like, I feel as if I could explain away. Oh, well, yeah, he doesn't have a motor because he's not playing in the NFL. But at the same time, that is a stupid answer. Like, I'll call myself out and be like, that is sunshine blowing at its finest. But hey, I could probably talk to you guys literally all day. Not only is there football on, but I can hear my baby yell in the other room. So I'm going to cut this podcast, get it up the network. We will talk soon. I'll let you guys know if we're doing this Tuesday. We may not be, but I will tell you guys later. Either way, good stuff. Bear down. The Chicago Bears got the number 1 overall pick. Everything's right in the world. Go Chicago. Go Bears. I'm very excited. Have a great one, everybody. See you later. Bear down.